This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's make a start. Welcome to the Institute of Commonwealth Studies. I'm Philip Murphy. I'm the director here. Most conferences nowadays start with the faintly comical ritual of the conference organizer explaining the fire drill. I realise this might sound a bit silly, but fire alarms in Senate House are particularly sensitive. There is such a thing as Murphy's Law, and it wouldn't be the first time that I've had to accompany speakers still clutching their scripts down to the Mallet Street entrance to wait for the fire engines to arrive. So, very simply, in case of a fire alarm sounding, please exit by the stairs to the left outside the hall, or indeed by the main ceremonial steps if there's a crowd there. Lunch and refreshments will be served in the foyer where coffee was served immediately outside the hall. And with that out of the way, I'd like to thank you all for coming today, and particularly to our distinguished chairs and speakers, many of whom have travelled great distances to join us. This conference is the latest of a series of seminars we've run in conjunction with the Overseas Service Pensioners Association. May I say what a pleasure it has been to work with David Le Breton and his colleagues at OSPA, and may I thank them for the tremendous efforts they've put into compiling this programme and for sponsoring this event. I'd also like to thank our own staff here at the Institute, and in particular to our events manager, Olga Jimenez, to her assistant, Chloe Peters, and to our publicity officer, Rob Kenyon. Their hard work and unfailing professionalism are absolutely key to the success of these events. And finally, in something of a preemptive strike, let me get in now. May I just say something, the briefest of words in defense of my own profession? There are a couple of extremely unhelpful myths that tend to complicate our work. The first is a suggestion from some writers on the left that there's some kind of sinister conspiracy on the part of UK historians to rehabilitate empire in the eyes of the British public. Yet when pressed for examples of historians engaged in this supposed whitewash, these writers can only ever seem to come up with the same 2 or 3 names. Conversely, historians are sometimes accused of being so ideologically blinkered in their attitudes to empire that they're incapable of benefiting from the insights of those who actually witness colonial rule in action. I have to say that I don't recognise either of these stereotypes. There are hundreds of professional historians working on the closing decades of the British Empire, and overwhelmingly their main preoccupation is to understand how colonial rule functioned, why it ended, and what its consequences were. Yes, they certainly want to explore some of the darker hidden corners of that story, but largely in the interests of having a more complete picture. They're keen to make the fullest use of the range of sources available to them, including oral evidence. Indeed, many of you here will personally have encountered eager young graduate students anxious to capture your own memories. This seminar series has been an excellent example of how historians and former practitioners can work in partnership. And the results have already been impressive, as the transcripts of earlier sessions, currently on sale at the back, will demonstrate. Our task today is to explore the legacy of the British Empire over a range of fields, including politics, economics, and culture. We'll be drawing on the memories of those who've had to negotiate the multifaceted legacy of empire over the course of their careers. We have a quite extraordinarily rich programme today, and I'm greatly looking forward to the discussions. And finally, may I make my usual plea to speakers and chairs to keep to time so that we can stay on schedule and provide sufficient time for discussion. We have a lot to pack in today. So thank you all very much. Let me ask Lord Goodlad to say a few words on behalf of OSPA.
Well, it's my happy task, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of OSPA, to thank Professor Murphy particularly, but also the Institute, for hosting us today and for all they've done over this series of seminars, of which this, I believe, is the last. You mentioned, Professor Murphy, the controversies that arise over colonial history. When I was in Australia, there was a book published called The History Wars, which sought to analyse the so-called black armband view of Australian history and contrast it with what Geoffrey Blainey called the three cheers view of Australian history. And I think that is true of the history of the Commonwealth and of the British Empire as much as it was of Australia. And I hope that this seminar, as with others, which is an enormous, if I may say so, happy gathering of the clans, will succeed in its objectives. And we're extremely grateful in advance to the witnesses, two of whom I see have now arrived. Thank you very much.
Thank you.